He also had what was he called his surgical
River king, which grows here naturally in Florida. It's very fine.
100. Thank you, Chris. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you very much for having me out here tonight, and thanks to the Central Gulf Coast Archaeological Society for inviting me out to come speak. Like Chris said, my name is Mike Terrell. I forgot I wrote that bio. I think when Bob contacted me to come talk, it was like October or something. It was way long time ago, and I was like, oh, Archaeology group, we'll put all my archaeology stuff in there. And then when you read that, I just need to start off by saying I'm not an archaeologist. I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I don't know if that counts. But I was in reflecting on this talk tonight, I was like, okay, so I'm gonna put together a talk. Think about your audience. Who's your audience? Okay, so they're a bunch of really, really engaged historical people, cultural preservation people. Let's not talk a lot about that because it's highly likely that you guys are going to know a lot more about this than me. So as the speaker, I need to make myself feel better by talking about something that probably I only know about and you guys will get educated on, right? Is that what speakers are supposed to do? Okay, good. So at least I'm thinking in the right direction here. Despite the fact that my talk is called The Battle of Ballast Point, the perspective I'm going to take on is not to retell the story of Ballast Point necessarily, even though that's part of what I'm going to be talking about. And it's not to do some sort of dramatical interpretation of it. I want to tell you my experience of the Battle of Ballast Point. And that's the experience as the dive safety officer at the aquarium. So there's lots of twists and turns. Yeah, Jeff's already jumping ahead in the story here. There's lots of twists and turns to that story. So I'll start at the end of the story, which is, I don't know if we found the Scottish chief. Don't know. Welcome to archaeology, right? We don't know. There's conflicting information. We thought we had, and now we're not so sure. But that's not the point of tonight's story. The point of tonight's story is to talk about why in the world is the aquarium doing underwater archaeology? I got asked that very question tonight at dinner. Well, the aquarium has our Center for Conservation Research. And our Center for Conservation Research, when the aquarium first opened back in the mid-90s, we were essentially viewed as a fishbowl, and we were for many, many years. It was a place where people could come, see fish, and that was about it. And about 6 years ago, our vice president of biological operations at the time decided to take us in a rather different direction. And she said, if we're going to have in our mission that we are a aquatic conservation organization, then we need to walk the walk. We need to be the place where people come for expert information on the aquatic environment. And one of the ways that we can do that is really start actively participating in conservation research initiatives. So this is just a few of the ones that we do. That's me up there, by the way, getting ready to launch a sea turtle into the water. So at the aquarium, one of the best parts about working there is that despite the fact that I'm a diver, we get to do all sorts of stuff all across the board because we need people to be able to go do it. And it also helps that right there is our vet tech, who is married to our director of dive operations, who is my boss. So by proxy, I work for her as well. So whenever the sea turtle people need help, dive ops gets called in to go help out with that. But you can see with all the fun stuff that we do as far as our research is concerned, there's a common theme, and the theme is animals. So every single one of those has some sort of animal or aquatic creature involved in it. So it still begs the question, how in the world did we get into underwater archaeology? Well, this goes back to what Chris said in our introduction, which was I graduated with a degree, an undergraduate degree from Indiana University. Yes, a landlocked university. A little tip of Lake Michigan kind of gets into Indiana, so it's not completely landlocked, I guess. That connects back to the Atlantic somehow. But the bottom line is that I started taking a lot of diving classes when I was at IU, and IU also had a fairly robust scientific diver program. And one of the things that they were working on was the shipwreck trail down in the Florida Keys. And they were doing a lot of mapping. So if you wanted to go out and do open water diving on projects, that's what they were working on. And I got really, really engaged in the shipwreck part of what they were doing. And really what intrigued me was the exploration part. And the part where, you know, you got to go down, you got to see something just by definition because you were diving, not everybody got to see. And it was usually something kind of cool and historical. And you got to have those moments where you were like, put your hand on something that you're like, you know, the last time this thing was above the water and someone else touched it was, you know, 100 years ago. And I was like, wow, that was cool. So that really, really excited my imagination and really engaged me on the cultural side of it, you know, more than just the dive operations side. So I ended up getting a degree in underwater archaeology, moved out to Colorado, got even more landlocked, decided, okay, it's time to get near some water, came down here and started working for the aquarium. And one of my first jobs at the aquarium was to work with our dive volunteers. And Casey, my boss, said, you know, Mike, you need to go out and find something for our volunteers to do. Okay, because, you know, they're sending, you know, Tom can tell you about this, you know, you go down in the saltwater swimming pools, really, because that's what they are, with our animals, and you scrub algae and you suck up poo. And it's like, okay. That's only engaging for so long, unless you're Tom and he's been around forever, and you know, but he's like, go find something for our volunteers to do. And I was like, huh, well, I haven't done any kind of underwater archaeology in a while. Why don't we try to do that? So I went to the senior management and I said, hey, let's go do underwater archaeology. And they said, how is shipwrecks have anything to do with the aquarium? And I said, well, look, this is what happens to shipwrecks when they're underwater. So if we go underwater and we can conserve the cultural aspect of the site, we're conserving the biological aspect as well. And they said, oh, that's a good angle. I was like, exactly. So let me go do it. So, you know, I don't have to preach. This is definitely preaching to the choir. When you preserve stuff underwater, especially in an aquatic environment, you get much neater results. You not only get the cultural aspect, but you get an entire, you know, coral reef. And, you know, in Florida, you know, let's be honest here, we don't have the greatest reputation of preservation, especially of underwater things. So, you know, this is what happens a lot of times in Florida water. Something goes down, people salvage it, and then, you know, the whole thing gets lost. The cultural aspect gets lost, the story gets lost, and then you know, the biological aspect never has a chance to take hold. And so the senior management decided that's kind of a cool angle to take. Go. And I said, okay, give me money. And they said, no. And honestly, the very first conversation I had with our CEO, Tom Stork, he said, so when you find the gold doubloons, can I sell them in the gift shop? And I said, we need to have a discussion here before we move forward. So he's definitely not on board with that any longer. So what ended up happening was we started our archaeological exploration of Tampa Bay. And my boss, Casey, and I, both very avid divers, both love this idea of exploration, decided to go looking for things. And I knew in the back of my mind, you know, you gotta do surveys, but we want to go find the shipwrecks. And so we were like, where can we find shipwrecks? And the Tampa Bay History Center is right up the road. So we went over there and talked to Randy, who was a curator at the time, and said, you know, hey, where's some shipwrecks that we can go look at? And he's like, well, there's this Scottish chief thing that's supposedly up in the Hillsborough River. And we were like, oh, okay, that's the river. That's not what we were expecting, but okay, that sounds good. And he's like, you know, it's kind of up by Lowry Park. We're like, okay. So we went up there and we're wandering around looking, and I think it was that day that Paul came up and was like, hey, what are you guys doing? We're like, hey, we're looking for the Scottish chief. And Paul's like, well, it's right there. And then we're like, huh, okay. And so after talking with a lot of people, we were like, the river's not that wide. We can go look for it, right? So we just decided to put our stuff on and get in the water. And that's what we saw. Absolutely nothing. Because you can't see anything in the river. And so we're literally groping around in the dark, swimming around, but we did start to see things, terrifying things, things that kept popping into our minds that just gave us absolute nightmares. It's really funny, by the way, the pictures that come up when you type in scary Obama and scary George Bush. So we were literally groping around in the dark. We can't see anything, but this was it. This is the resources we had. And we were like, if we can put our hands on this thing, that would be something really cool and a really fun story to be able to tell. So we did find something. We found sharks, found alligators, we found manatees, we found handguns, and we found that. So it was on our, I think, second or third exploration. We were swimming along, and we're in a hole like 8 feet of water. This is like half the depth of our biggest tank at the aquarium. So it's not like we were deep and everything, but it felt like we were 500 miles underwater because it was pitch black. And we both had lights, and about halfway into the dive, my light fails, but Casey still has his light. And so I was like, well, I'll just follow him. So I'm hovering over the top of him, holding onto the back of his tank, and he's sweeping his light back and forth. We're looking, not finding it. We're looking, and then his light comes across this pale form. And all those other images are going through our head, the Exorcist and everything. And he swings his light back, and I'm not joking, it's the sole of a foot. And we about walked on the water to get out. And we got up, we were like, did you see that? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, did you see that? I was like, yeah. And I was like, should we call someone? What do we do? And so we mustered our courage, and we went back down, and it literally was the bottom half of a mannequin. And we're like, why would someone throw that in the river? That's just not right. But we did find numerous handguns that we got to call the TPD, and it's like, hey, you might want to come out and grab this. And this was, to fast forward the story a little bit, this was when we had actually started our proper surveys, and we were attempting to find the thing I'm getting ready to show you. And I was underwater, I was tethered to the surface, and our professional archaeologist was on the surface, and I was sweeping around trying to find the object, couldn't find it. I came up, and he's like, you need to get out of the water. I'm like, why? He's like, there's a shark. I saw a shark come by. We're in the river. It's got to be a bull shark. And I'm thinking, he's the archaeologist. I'm the aquarium guy. How does he know it was a bull shark? It's probably a jack or something. And so I'm swimming out of the water, and behind me, like Jaws, the fin comes by. And I was like, yep, that's shark. I'm getting out of the water. But by far, the single most scary thing to ever happen to us in the river was that. A manatee. You just don't understand how disturbing it is in zero visibility to have a half-ton animal sit on top of you while you're trying to do archaeology. It's not a pleasant thing whatsoever, but that is by far the scariest thing. But got the gators and the sharks and everything out there. So this is what we ended up finding. We're still not too sure what it is, but this was our official, first find of the project. It sits on the turn right up by Lowry Park. It looks like some sort of old piece of machinery. And we've roached around a little bit around there, and there's really not much else there. This is supposedly the place where McKay's boats went down, and maybe it is. Maybe it's a piece of machinery off of one of the boats, but it seems fairly isolated, and nothing else really around it. But that was the first fun thing that we found, and the camera is about 1.5 inches away from the thing right now, and that's about the only way that we could get video of it. So after roaching around in the river and basically not really doing anything productive, we decided to get some help. And what we ended up doing was making a phone call. And we were like, well, there's got to be somebody that's better at this than we are. So let's just call a state. So we called the Bureau of Archaeological Resources, and I wanted to talk to the state's underwater archaeologist. And they said, well, he's not in right now. Would you like to talk to this other individual? I said, sure. So I began talking with her, and a weird thing happened. We started talking about our experiences, and they were the same. We started talking about the projects that we worked on in college, and they were the same. And lo and behold, I had actually graduated from IU with this individual, and she now worked for the Florida Department of, or the Bureau of Archaeological Resources. And I'm like, this is obviously meant to be. We're supposed to be doing this. So we finally travel up to Tallahassee, and we meet with Roger Smith, and we were like, we're looking for some archaeology stuff. We're looking for some guidance. What can we do? And he pulls up a map of the Tampa Bay region, or I'm sorry, an entire map of Florida. And he says, these are all the underwater sites that have been documented by the state that we know of. And here's what we know of in the Tampa Bay region. And we're like, you have to be kidding me. That's ridiculous. 3 sites in all of Tampa Bay: Manatee, Sarasota, Hillsborough County. And we're like, that's ridiculous. There's no way. He's like, yep, that's it. He's like, so you guys really have a blank page to go from. And since then, we have actually included a lot more sites now. Many of these have been added to the master site file. But during our first 2 years of surveying, we uncovered no less than 80 sites, potential sites that we could go back to. So there's this plethora of information down there, and no one's looking at it. And I would refer back to my previous slides as to why. No one in their right mind goes diving for fun in Tampa Bay. And with the East Coast being so prolific in wrecks, and the Keys being so prolific in Spanish wrecks and gold and all that sort of stuff, it just kind of makes sense that no one really thought, or frankly, really got around to looking around in Tampa Bay. So we were like, hey, we could actually do this. So what ended up happening is we applied to the state for a grant, and we ended up getting awarded a grant, and we've gotten subsequent grants since. But I think our first one was back in 2006 now, 2006, 2007. And the idea was to basically identify all these resources. And that was, we were really shooting for the low bar here because they just simply hadn't been identified at all in any sort of official way for the Bureau of Archaeological Resources. And we then took some specific sites to do a little bit of further investigation on. And those sites have changed over the years depending on what we were working on. But one of the ones that we had obviously started with was the Scottish Chief. And so we were like, now that we've got the money, now that we've got the big guns, professional archaeologists, they have the toys, let's go look for this thing. So we spent a couple summers going up and down the Hillsborough River, up and down, all the way up to the dam and back, with the sonar and magnetometers and looking for this thing. And we found some stuff. We found some really cool stuff. But before I get to what we actually found, for those of you who don't know, I want to kind of segue a little bit into the actual battle of the Battle of Tampa, because it was really the only battle that was fought in Tampa during the Civil War. There were some other skirmishes, and on the scope of the rest of the Civil War, this almost really still falls into a bit of a skirmish. But just like anything, it seems like historical in Florida, it's a little weird. It's got some interesting little sidelights and everything. Tom and I were talking about some of them earlier. But essentially what ended up happening was there was this gentleman by the name of James McKay, and he was a businessman here in Central Florida, made his living taking cattle from Tampa and heading down to Cuba, and ended up having a lot of different businesses. Well, during the war, he continued to do that, and he was supplying goods and services for the South, for the Confederacy. This is, being from up north, the Civil War is kind of over. So whenever I give these talks down here, I'm just not too, is it still the War of Northern Aggression? Will the South rise again? Understand that I have the utmost respect. So whatever terminology I use, full respect. And I'm driving the white Toyota truck in the parking lot. So sorry, Bob. Anyways, so he was basically supporting the Confederacy during the war. Well, needless to say, the North was getting kind of sick of it. They ended up arresting him, putting him in jail. He got a pardon from President Lincoln got out of jail with the promise, hey, you know, I'm good, I'm just going to go back to my business stuff. He didn't. He started supporting the South again, and so what the Union decided to do was send 2 boats, the Tahoma and the Adela, up into Tampa Bay and start bombing Fort Brooke, which, for those of you that don't know, used to sit at the current day site of the convention center downtown. So they started shelling it, and it was simply a distraction so they could offload about 100 troops down at Ballast Point, where the battle gets its name, right down there. And they offloaded the troops, and they knew that McKay had his boats up in the river to get all the barnacles and everything off of it, so that, you know, he could have really fast, you know, blockade running boats. And problem was they offloaded here, and they wanted to be here. So they had to walk, but they didn't really know where they were going. So this is where the story gets a little weird. So they had 2 guys with them that supposedly knew where they were going. During the trip, one of them gets kind of gimpy, and so they got to put him on a litter and drag him. Okay? So they're dragging this guy through the palmettos and the pine trees and the sawgrass. And I mean, this, you know, they're not walking up, you know, the side of 275 here. You know, this is, you know, back in the bush. So they're dragging this poor guy up, and they're also carrying a small boat with them, because they knew McKay was up in the river, but they didn't know which side of the river. So they were dragging this boat along with them in case they got to the wrong side of the river, then they could just go in the boat and do whatever they needed to do. So about halfway there, they're like, forget this, we're dragging the guy already, we're not dragging the boat anymore. They leave the boat, and they, you know, it was like 14 miles. They hike all the way up, they get to the river, and they're on the wrong side. They see McKay and his guys across the river, and they're like, can you come get us, please? And they're like, sure. So they send some boats across, and they get the troops, and the Union troops say, ha, we're here to destroy your boats, and they torch them. They had a load of cotton on them, and there was 2 vessels, maybe 3, maybe 4, but definitely the Scottish Chief, which was the larger sidewheel steamer, rear wheel steamer? Sidewheel steamer? I don't know. And the Kate Dale, which is a smaller sailing vessel, a sloop. And so they torched the thing. And some of the guys escaped, including McKay, and headed back to Fort Brooke. So they were up here, and they ran back down here to Fort Brooke. It became obvious to the Union troops that they had been had at that point, and so began the race to Ballast Point. Once all the troops, you know, they mustered the Confederate troops, which were less than organized at that point. Again, there wasn't a whole lot going on in Tampa during the Civil War. But they ended up chasing the Union troops back down here to the point. And again, they had to get like 100 guys back onto these 2 vessels. So it took them some time to do that. So in the skirmish, I believe there was like 5 or 6 Confederacy soldiers that were killed, a handful, like 2 or 3 Union soldiers that were killed. But the Union considered it a success, because their whole point was to stop McKay from running the blockades. So they had basically torched his vessels, and that was it, and they were done. Ironically enough, I think the Confederacy also considered it a victory, because they kind of routed this Union force of 100 troops and forced them off the beach, you know. So I think they kind of used that to their advantage as well. But the bottom line is McKay was pretty much out of business at that point. Yeah, that's where they were. Thank you, Arrow. So we decided that it would be worthwhile for us to take a look and find these, because considering it was the only real battle of the Civil War fought in Tampa Bay, James McKay was one of the mayors of Tampa, so there was a really neat local connection to what we were looking for. So we decided to go take a look for them, and the 2 that we were focused on were the Kate Dale, which is a sailing sloop, and the Scottish Chief, which is drawn here. Maybe it was a side, maybe it was a rear wheel steamer. The one we found was a rear wheel steamer, so we're hoping it was a rear wheel steamer, but who knows. That's part of why we don't know if we actually found the Scottish Chief. So we began the process of working in the river, actually working in the river. And despite the fact that we had funding, despite the fact that we had professional archaeologists on board, it didn't really get any easier. This is our manager of dive operations. Her name is Lauren, despite the fact that she has a mustache. This is her alter ego, Larry, instead of Lauren. But yeah, this is what happens to you when you start digging around in the bottom of the river. It just throws up massive, massive amounts of silt. And there are other critters that, because of the saltwater intrusion, as the water comes in during tidal changes, you get all sorts of fun stuff running around. So I'll show you how we mitigated that finally later. But working in the river, we ended up utilizing this kind of system. So this is for you toy geeks and diving geeks. This is where you can kind of geek out. This is a surface applied system. And for those of you familiar with scuba diving, you usually put a tank on your back, you got this breathy thing in your mouth, wear a mask, you go for a dive. The problem with that is that you tend to get water in your mouth on occasion, which is kind of gross up in the river, and you're very, very exposed. This sort of system, and plus in the bad visibility, it's really easy to get separated from your buddy, as you can imagine. So what we ended up doing is, the reason this looks homemade is because it is. We built this, and essentially what it is it's a communication system, which is the box up here, combined with a scuba system on steroids. And essentially this is the first stage of the unit, and it can take 2 tanks on it, and you can isolate the tanks. So essentially you can just keep adding tanks to the system as the divers are underwater, giving you an essentially unlimited amount of air supply underwater. But the really nice thing about it is you can put 4 divers on the underwater at the same time. And those divers then have verbal communication back to the surface. And we've even gone so far as to use this system in documenting what we're doing underwater. So we'll have a person that has a video camera and they're videoing the site. You know, they're just swimming around doing whatever. And they can do a verbal narration of what they're finding. And then we record that top side. And then we can put it back in a computer and put the audio track with the video track, and now we've got a really neat documentation of what we're doing. And we use this on essentially all of our open water projects now. But it's been really nice to be able to mitigate that Hillsborough River bottom bunk because this covers your full face, thus full face mask system, and that's what allows you to use the comms system. So this is us diving off of our boat up there by the Tampa Armature Works. So it's worked really well. What we were able to uncover is this, which I can't really take credit for uncovering because at low tide it sticks out of the water. This was another local person that was kind enough to say, hey, I've got something sticking out of the water in my backyard. Do you want to come take a look at it? We're like, sure. So we know around the turn of the century, though, there was a lot of barges. There's a lot of barge traffic in the river, and there are barges that have sunk in the river. And when we were looking at this, we were like, oh, man, it really looks like a barge. So what we ended up doing was mapping all of this. And once we mapped it, we realized, oh, look at that. It's got a nice little curve to it. Most barges don't do that. And then through a lot of other diagnostic tools, we even did some excavating across to the center line of the vessel. We definitely realized it was a sailing sloop. And so now we had to tie it back into the story of the Battle of Ballast Point. So unfortunately, a lot of the frames, which were the bits sticking up out of the bottom, were really covered with barnacles. And so it was really hard to get any sort of diagnostic information from them. The deeper parts that extend down into the deeper river were perfectly preserved. And if you look real close here, this is definitely charred and burned. So you have a sailing sloop of the same size and dimensions of the Kate Dale that had been burned in the location where the Kate Dale went down. We're going to go, what our archaeology says, 98% that this is the Kate Dale. So that was really cool. It was the first of the vessels to be able to be positively identified and reported back to the state as such. So then we started the process of looking for the Scottish chief itself. And this is the end of the story, and it's going to end very abruptly because what ended up happening was we were running a survey And we had surveyed this part of the river. Again, to orient you, this is the 275 bridge that crosses the Hillsborough River. This is the Tampa Armature Works and everything. This is Blake High School. So you can see this when you drive over the bridge. There's this lovely little notch out of the river, or the river bank, and then this is Waterworks Park right here. Something came up on our sonar image that had never come up before, and it was this. And interestingly enough, this, you can't really tell because it's mostly buried here. It almost looks like railroad tracks. But it's not. It's definitely a ship. And it has, within a foot, the same dimensions of the Scottish Chief that we can tell. The only problem is this thing back here. So this really looks like a rear paddle wheel ship. And everything that we can find describes Mackay's Scottish Chief as a side wheel steamer. So thus the big question mark. We're not sure. But it's the same size and dimension, and the other issue was, she's not where she supposedly should be. This is nowhere near Lowry Park. So we kind of put our logical hats on and said, the Scottish Chief is 120 some feet long. And if you've ever gone up to Lowry Park and looked at the river right there, it's not that big. So if I had a vessel that was pretty much burned to the water line, go down in that part of the river, but it still had all of its mechanical stuff on board, would I leave it there? Or would I take it someplace to try to pull it out of the river and get all that stuff off of it? And there is a marina that sits on the river that, again, this guy knew a guy who said they told him a story sort of thing, that supposedly that was exactly the case. That indeed the Scottish Chief didn't stay up at Lowry Park, and they actually towed it back downriver and pulled it out where a spring-fed stream used to come into the Hillsborough right here, stripped it of all of its mechanical stuff, and then just shoved it right back in the deeper part of the river. Is that the case? I don't know. Like I said, I just stayed at the Holiday Inn Express. I'm not the archaeologist. But needless to say, this was an unbelievable adventure to get to this point. So where are we at right now? We're not doing anything with this. The main reason that we're not doing anything with this is there's a couple other wreck sites that are taking our resources. One is the USS Narcissus, which sits out on Egmont Shoals. We're 100% sure that that's what it is. And we're working in conjunction with the state of Florida to turn it into an underwater archaeological preserve. We've already got the designation, so it's technically already been designated a preserve. We just haven't dedicated it yet. So one of the things, it's going to be the first, because it was a vessel that went down during a time of war, because it went down during the Civil War. The federal government still owns it. So again, for those of you that do any sort of dealing with the government, the federal government owns it, but it's in state waters, but it's next to the shipping channel, so Hillsborough County has something to say about it, but it's next to the shipping channel, so the Port Authority has something to say about it, and God help us, we want to put some moorings on it. So we want to penetrate into the bottom. So needless to say, this has been an over a year process to get the thing dedicated so that we can actually publicize it and have divers to come out and actually visit the site, which is ultimately what we want to do. But because that's taken up so much of our resources, and the other vessel that's out there, we haven't been back to visit the wannabe Scottish Chief. So that's really the end of the story. For those of you that are divers, we probably use about 60% of our labor to go out and do these projects. And so for those of you that are divers, if you want to be involved and go do this stuff, these are the requirements to be a volunteer diver to get into the program, and then this is what we ask of you once you're in the program. We definitely could not do these projects without the help of volunteers, and I will definitely give props to Tom and Marcy because not only have they helped us out with our Tampa Bay Shipwreck Project, but we've worked with the University of Miami at Little Salt. We have coral restoration projects that we work on, and they've been a huge, huge help, helping to facilitate those projects. And our volunteers get to go out and do that stuff too, which is really fun. So anyways, I want to stop there because I figure you guys have some questions, and I wanted to leave enough time to answer those. What do you got? Thank you. And it can be about anything. I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I'm really good at making stuff up. Got the background archaeology, I can make stuff up. Yes, it's been reported to the state as a site, but since we really haven't put a positive ID on it, that's why I say it's kind of the wannabe Scottish chief. And we keep getting phone calls. I got a phone call a few months ago from a guy who is actually past the bend in the river by Lowry Park, saying, "Hey, I was fishing and my rod got caught on something and it kind of looks like a shipwreck. Do you want to come here and check it out?" And I was like, "All right, sure." I go out there and yeah, it's a shipwreck. So there's even more fun stuff to be found in there. And there was, I can't remember who it was, but when we were at dinner, in fact it might have been Bob, that said something along the lines of, not only why are you doing underwater archaeology, he followed that up with, that's not really the aquarium's mission. And I was like, you're exactly right, it's not. And archaeology as a profession, because you're gathering the level of information that you need to properly document it and properly tell the story, just moves at a glacial pace. So imagine a group that has an interest in it and we do it, but that's not our bread and butter. We just can't move this stuff, move it ahead as quickly as we would want to. I would love to send a team out and look at the Scottish chief and look at the Narcissus and look at all this other stuff, but it's literally, we've got to focus our resources somewhere. And right now, the best bang for our buck is the shipwreck out on the shoals. No, the USS Narcissus was a tug, and one of its claims to fame was that during the Battle of Mobile, it participated in the cleanup of the Battle of Mobile. I mean, it was a tug; it wasn't out there, blowing up ships or anything. And it hit a torpedo, which was just a mine underwater. It sank. They raised her, fixed her, and basically just put her back in service as a tug. And at the very end of the war, in January of '64, she was heading back from Mobile Bay, Pensacola area, heading down to actually be decommissioned in New York. I believe it was New York, somewhere along the East Coast. Got around Tampa Bay, got caught in a storm with another vessel. That vessel was able to safely anchor, and she got washed up on the shoal. Water entered her lower hull, and it hit the boiler, and the thing exploded. And it went down, killed everybody on board. And one of the interesting little side stories is when we were out there last year, about a year and a half ago now, we were doing some measurements and trying to make the site plan as comprehensive as we could, and came across something really remarkable. It turns out it was a lantern that was used on the vessel. And we know that people have been out there with mailboxes and digging around and taking stuff off the site. So we were frankly shocked that we were able to find anything loose just lying around. When you look back at the story of the sinking of the vessel, they were communicating with these lanterns, with the other vessels. So of course my mind immediately runs to, this thing was on deck, signaling when the thing went down. So I was like, it sends chills down my spine. But we sent that to Tallahassee. It's now conserved. But again, because it's a federal vessel, the Naval Heritage Command wants it. And then they're going to decide what to do with it. We're like, we'll put it on display at the aquarium. 750,000 people every year. Yeah, they might want to see that. So, but that's kind of its story. And underwater, it's the engine, the entire steam engine is down there. It's lying on its side, but it was probably about 10 feet tall, and the base was probably about 4 or 5 feet square. But it's a single piston steam engine. There's a baby Goliath grouper that lives in it. It's really cute. and all sorts of other critters. It has soft coral, hard coral growing on it. Who thinks hard coral 2 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico? But there's all kinds of fun stuff on it. And then there's a propeller with the drive shaft sticking out of it, and there's 2 adult Goliath groupers that live on that. And then all the boiler fragments are everywhere. And then Jeff and his group. Has it been you? Yeah, it's been a little bit of everybody. You and Della and everybody keeps sending us information. They keep finding all this other stuff out there. The Bay Area reef runners, the bar divers, keep sending us information about stuff that they find out there. The anchor is out there somewhere as well. It's people have pictures of that. I haven't put my hands on it yet. The smokestack is out there. So yeah, there's a lot of pieces to the site. So it's not a huge site, but we know people are diving it already. And so our intent is, hey, if you're going to dive it, let's educate you about it, and here's how to dive it respectfully. And the reason that the state was really interested, again, in us being involved is when you look at all these other underwater preserves that are around the state, they do a really good job of telling the story of the vessel, of the wreck, the whole 9 yards. But then when you look at the biological aspects of them, it's like barracuda, angelfish, and it's like, that's it. Great white, yeah, whatever. Bruce. So, we're like, oh, we can do better than that. We actually sent just 2 of our biologists out there one day, and we're like, do a workup on this thing, do a survey on it. And we did the other wreck that we're working on out there as well, Shake's wreck. And again, to me, the 2 most striking things that during a 45-minute survey dive they were able to discern was that there was over, I want to say, 40 different species of fish on each of the sites, and that there was soft and hard coral growing on these sites. And again, people just don't think of coral reefs not only in the Gulf, but just that close to shore, because the Shakes wreck, the other site that we're working on, is a mile offshore, and Narcissus is only 2 miles offshore. We have people that are part of the Egmont Alliance and say they can see the wreck from the lighthouse on Egmont Key when the water clarity is good. So, first of all, to answer your first question is yes. Each one of these underwater preserves has a friends group that's associated with them, and it's their responsibility to monitor the site. Now, that's pretty much where that commitment ends. And again, talking with the state, the other friends groups don't really report a whole lot back. Because the federal government still owns this vessel, the only way they would sign off on its designation as a park is that they mandated that we do that once a year. It's like, okay, we can go dive out there once a year and do a report. That's pretty easy. But we wanted to take a step further. So what we've done is we've set up a Facebook site for it. Friends of Narcissus. You could be a friend of the Friends of Narcissus as well. The idea behind that is that once the monitoring starts, you as John Q. Public diver can go out, look at the site, even take pictures, and then immediately come back and upload those to the Friends site. Now, is that the official report that the federal government of the state's going to want? No. But what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to share that information in real time with the general public. Because that was one of the mandates of this park system, was to take this cool stuff that's underwater, that's limited in accessibility, and put that in the hands of the people again. And what our mentality has always been as the aquarium is we don't just want to have the people who can visit it in person experience this stuff. That's kind of why an aquarium exists. Not everybody can go to the South Pacific and see these cool, unbelievable animals. So you put them in an aquarium so anyone can do it. So we're continuing that mentality with the Friends group, is that even those people that can't scuba dive can still experience the wreck site through those sorts of resources. And then on our own website, once we start getting this information flowing, we're going to be posting it on there as well, so that you can be a part of the process. As far as the trust factor goes, I get asked frequently to do talks like this to a wide variety of groups. And one of the ones that I talked to a number of years ago was the Fossil Hunting Club that's based out of USF. And I get up there and I give a similar presentation, but it's about the Narcissus because that's what we were working on. And I was very proud, and okay, we're doing archaeology, and it's wonderful, and da da da. Guy raises his hand in the back when I'm done. And I was like, yeah, go ahead. He says, when are you going to get all of the expletive polypropylene off of my site? I was like, whoa, you're hired. You know, that was the kind of ownership that we wanted people to take. And what had happened was we were working on the site for a month in bad visibility. So we had just taken yellow polypro and tied it between the major items so we could find our way around underwater. He had gone out there and obviously had been diving it while we had been working it. We didn't realize it. And he was upset that we had left that polypro out there. I was like, that's fantastic. That's the kind of citizen level ownership that we want over this site. Now, is that going to prevent everything from walking off the site? Nope. But I remember having a discussion along these lines back in college, along the lines of people looting sites, not utilizing sites the way they're supposed to, taking artifacts and things like that. And at the time when I was in college, this whole idea of creating this shipwreck trail down in Florida was kind of a new idea. And the pushback they got is like, why are you telling everybody where this stuff is? People are going to come in and destroy it. And the response was, the people who are going to mess it up already know where it is. And by hiding it from the public view, you're just encouraging that below the radar kind of mentality. And I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way. So our tack that we're taking on it is that a properly educated public that can really learn to appreciate this stuff will learn to love it. And you protect what you love. And that's the idea, is that we make everybody stewards of the site. So we're not having to go out there and protect it. And if you go out to dive the site and you see somebody down there roaching around, you're going to be the one that goes up and says, hey, put that back, you know, or give us a call and be like, hey. So, but yeah, we've looked into, if you want to go the complete other extreme, we've talked to the Tampa PD, Hillsborough County and everything, and they're like, we've got so many drunk boaters on the water. That's what takes up our Marine Patrol's time, not somebody taking a belt buckle off of a shipwreck. So about 10 years ago, actually a little bit less than that, about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, there was a massive red tide event in the Gulf, wiped out everything. You know, you get out more than about 2 miles offshore and it was a dead zone until you got a few hundred yards offshore. So USF was doing a lot of research with that. And they were literally looking at what species were coming back, how quick the recruitment was, and we were flabbergasted because we went out, it was essentially at the end of the red tide event, we're standing on the boat, and we're coughing and gagging, I mean there's still all this red tide everywhere, and we get underwater because it was breathing cleaner air at that point, and you went down and there was nothing alive, and I can't exaggerate that. There was no fish, there was no invertebrates, it was dead. Over the course of the next year where we did the monitoring, it not only came back, but with a deeper diversity than before. So, you know, when they're looking at the causes of red tide and things like that, you know, it's almost like a fire that goes through a forest. It's a cleansing event, and you get even more diversity on the back end. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go make a bunch of phosphates in the water and create a bunch of red tide. But what I'm saying is that despite how catastrophic it seemed and how catastrophic it was, I mean, there was a bunch of dive operations that went out of business because no one wanted to dive in the Gulf anymore. A bunch of fishing charters went out of business because they had to go hundreds of miles offshore to find any fish. A year after that, about a year and a half after that, the Gulf had completely recovered. So it's unbelievable. We need to leave it alone, nature's ability to heal itself. The ones that we actually go out and investigate, because again, we're not an archaeological firm, this is not what we do, we have to be very careful of the logistics of where we go. And we combine that with the research that again is going to say, what's the most significant thing here? And again, the wreck that just a normal person put us onto up in the river a few months ago is a perfect example of that. We went, we looked at it, we had our archaeologist come in and look at it. It's historic, it's more than 50 years old. And it's now in the master site file. Is it worth our time to go and really inspect it and make a high detailed? Probably not when we have these other high profile sites that are out there. But like I said, we have some 80 targets that are sitting in a binder that literally we just need to put a diver on and say, yep, that's a pile of PVC, so we can check that off the list. Or, nope, that's a turn-of-the-century steam engine. We might want to flag this and come back and do a little bit more investigation. So, yeah, we've got a lot. And in fact, in 2014, on our next grant cycle, I think we're going to do some more surveying. Because there's some other sites that people have brought to us and everything that we want to go check out with some little bit better toys than swimming around and looking at them. So in case you didn't get that, Marcy, there was a person in the audience of the general public that wants to know when we're going to have a display at the aquarium. Would you be willing to pay to get into the aquarium to see that exhibit? Yes, they would be willing to pay to get into the, okay, so give that to Stork, okay. The answer is yes, that is absolutely our intention. That's the problem. Right now, we don't have a rotating exhibit space, so unless it's an aquatic animal and it goes underwater, we don't really have a home for anything like that. There's a few opportunities that are coming up that might give us that. One is an expansion that we're doing at the aquarium. We're building a large event center on the side of it, a 600-seat event center. And it's going to be on the 3rd floor. The bottom floor is our restaurant, so sandwiched in the middle is supposed to be a rotating exhibit space. So that would be a perfect place for something like that. Along parallel with that, we've partnered up with Fish and Wildlife and Tico Energy, and we're opening a energy conservation wildlife park. It doesn't have a name yet. We're calling it Tico Acres, but that's not the name of it yet. But bottom line is it's going to be, everybody know where the power plant is down in Ruskin? Big power plant, manatees go up there. We're going to be opening up a, for us what we're doing is we're moving a lot of our quarantine systems down there because we've got a lot of on-site quarantine, just not enough room. So we need to be able to move that stuff off-site, but we're moving all of our rehabilitation programs down there. Sea turtles, we want to do manatees and dolphins in the future, but definitely sea turtles, river otters, and all that sort of stuff. Fish and Wildlife is doing fisheries management down there. So they're going to be breeding fish and everything, snook and redfish, to be able to reintroduce into the wild. And Tico donated the land. So that they're going to have displays down there about sustainable energy, cutting edge energy stuff down there. That has absolutely the opportunity to be able to exhibit this type of stuff down there. And my understanding, don't quote me on this, is that you won't even have to pay to get in there. It's going to be a free park that you can visit. So it's going to have kayaking and all sorts of great stuff. And where that really ties into us is our educational mission and really trying to get the kids when they're young. So instead of talking about ecology and stuff like that in our aquarium and maybe even showing them movies about it, we're going to go down and traipse around the mangroves and get them dirty and get them wet and really get them into the environment. Where the wannabe Scottish chief is, about 15 feet is what you see. You've been roaching around in there. You seen 15 feet? Have you seen anything? Yeah. Kate Dale sticks out of the water. So, you know, 0 feet. So, yeah, it's not deep at all. And trying to imagine a 120-foot vessel in there. Now, this supposedly only drew 4 feet. So they could definitely get them up there. But that's a big, big boat to be up in the river. But yeah, it's not. Well, very good. Thank you very much for coming. If you are interested about the aquarium or volunteering or whatever, I did leave a few business cards there on the back table with the Florida Archaeology Month posters, so feel free to grab those. And I'll be hanging out afterwards if anyone has any other questions. So thank you very much.